Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the invitation to share with you what I have on my heart with respect to mental health of deaf people, what I have learned and I'm still learning about mental health of people who are deaf and have problems to communicate. That has been a lifelong story for me, to work with people who are deaf, to live with people who are deaf, and to do research in that field. First, to give you a short personal background. My father was deaf. I grew up with him. He was an artist, and we couldn't speak to each other, but we could do paintings, and so I was also trained in arts. My mother was hearing, she was like an interpreter for him. And later on, I became a medical doctor for neurology, for psychiatry, for child neurology, and I started very early, when I was about 30 years, in a hospital where I saw how deaf people are treated not well. And I was shocked, because I loved my father. And so I started to offer outpatient services for people who are deaf in sign language. And as soon as the deaf community knew that, many deaf people came from all over Austria. Austria is a country in Central Europe. And by this I started to serve deaf people in healthcare. I could set up services for health care in different places in Austria and also in other places in Europe. And I started to serve especially a very vulnerable group of deaf people with additional handicaps, with therapeutic communities, but also I'm very involved in early intervention in children who are deaf and hard of hearing. That is only part of my professional background. But I also tell you about my personal background. My wife's father was deaf as well. So we grew up together. And she understood that I loved deaf people because she loved deaf people. And so she supported all the development of the deaf services in Austria. And together we have 7 children. That is wonderful. That is a gift. But now we come to our main topic: mental health of deaf people. What is mental health? That is a really difficult question. I thought, instead of just giving a definition, I will paint a picture which should show what mental health is visually. Give me a few seconds to paint the picture of what I think could be an expression of mental health. What do we see in that picture? In the face. Look at that. Is that face sad? No. That face looks relaxed and happy. But that is not all what has to be told about mental health. Look at what our signs, shown by the signs I will paint now, show. This, you know the sign. This shows okay all over the world. And we see that person is showing I'm okay. The direction of the sign is towards oneself. I'm okay. I'm grateful who I am. But that is not all about mental health. You know this sign. This is a very important sign. This sign is saying, I love you. And that is the other aspect of mental health. I say yes to myself and I love you. But that is not only to one person, that is a much wider circle. So we have to make that clear. This is outreaching. So if we look at that picture, we see mental health is a state of well-being. The WHO also says well-being, where a person can really develop his or her potential. We see that. And that person is also in a good connection with others and can contribute to society. That is the most important thing we should now store in our brain when we speak about mental health of deaf people, because speaking about that also means we have the vision to serve the deaf communities all over the places, and you come from so many places from Africa, to develop mental health as much as possible. But there's another side. We have mental health problems. All of us know that this happy face doesn't look so all the time. Look at that face. That person doesn't look so happy. Or what about that face? And about that? These faces do not look that happy as the first face. They all show there is a problem, a mental health problem. We read in the faces how people feel. The first face we see sadness. You know all the feeling of sadness. Sometimes we cry. Sometimes our sadness is very quiet. We don't cry, but we just don't feel anything. The other face is showing when we are upset, we are angry, we are shouting. That's also showing that we are not in a good state of well-being. And that face is showing we are anxious. We are afraid something bad is coming. Our tension can be felt all over the body. These faces only show what mental health problems can be. But we have to dig a little bit deeper. What do we know about mental health problems and mental health disorders? We know a lot about mental health disorders. There are really illnesses which are defined by the World Health Organizations and have specific characteristics. Let's give an example of a mental health disorder. Let's say severe depression is a real mental health disorder. In severe depression, a person does not feel well at all. that person is over a longer time of at least 2 weeks not able to really do things, can't sleep, has no appetite, feels worth nothing, can't contribute, and thinks about killing himself. This is a very severe depression. This is an illness, but all of us know a little bit of it. Feeling sad without a reason, feeling not motivated to do anything, feeling empty, but 2 days later it's better again. So it is not easy to make a clear distinction in the medium part, you know. It is always a dimension. What do we see here? We see the level of mental health problems. There's hardly any person who does not have mental health problems. But we have days we are really happy. But some days are like that, a mixture of mental health problems and quite okay. But some have severe mental health problems and don't feel well at all. And this dimension where we don't feel well at all and the problems are overburdening can sometimes be times of a real mental health disorder. If you are in a dimension of a mental health disorder, you need real professional help. But there's a long period where support by friends and others can be very helpful. And we have to speak about that as a second part of the presentation. Now, having shown this, I want to share with you what I have learned about mental health problems in deaf people. And give you some explanations for what we have observed in research. I won't just mention, I've written a series of articles. You will get the links, you can read it up. But I want to speak to you and address you directly. And so I don't list all the detailed figures here. I show you the most important results. So the question is, what do we know about mental health problems in deaf people? I start with what we know about mental health problems in adult deaf people. There are a few research studies, and I've done quite a few of them, about the prevalence, which is the rate, how frequent mental health problems occur in populations. And I give you the results of a few studies. The first study I did with 300 patients of the deaf clinic. And I saw, when I asked them about whether they felt nervous and distressed, 70% said, yes, I feel nervous, I feel distressed. And when I compare this with hearing populations, I saw that it's much a higher rate compared to the hearing population. And I also asked the population who was deaf about complaints like headache, like back pain, headache, like stomach problems. And I saw the patients differed from what general practitioners saw in our country. The rates of somatic complaints was much higher compared to the other hearing group. Nervous tension was 30% higher. Back pain, we had a double rate. Headache, 6 times higher. Just to give you that impression, we have a higher burden of symptoms in the population who was deaf. I will give you a short picture which shows this. These are 2 persons, but each person has to carry something. Both persons carry a bag. What we found in that first study was that deaf persons carry a bigger rucksack of somatic complaints compared to hearing people. But we wanted to dig deeper, so we made a research project within the deaf community. We developed a questionnaire which was used internationally in sign language, and we asked about quality of life. What did we find? The deaf population reported worse quality of life in their mental health, in their physical health, in their knowledge about environment, but with respect to the social life, the members of the deaf community reported quite the same levels of satisfaction with life compared to the hearing. I will give you a graph of it. This is about mental health. This is about physical health. This is about social relationships. This is about the environment. And here we saw members of the deaf community reported they have friends in the deaf community, they have sexual relationships, and they were satisfied with the social relationships they had. When we assessed the population who was hard of hearing but not signing and not members of the deaf community, we found a different thing. We found the same problems in mental health, the same problems in physical health, but very big problems in their social relationships. It was like that. A very interesting finding which shows that being part of a signing community is a protective factor which helps to promote mental health, at least in social relationships. Another study I want to show you which we did in children. We found that deaf school children in a representative sample in Upper Austria reported in about 26% that they had already a depression. That is at least double the rate of the hearing children who didn't report these problems. And what we found, the children who couldn't make themselves understood in the family had 4 times as many mental health problems compared to the children who could make themselves understood in their family. And this was also linked with the problems they had at school with other school colleagues. I just give you a short graph of that. Here you see a child who wants to make himself understood, but the parents don't understand. And these children have the highest risk of mental health problems. And the whole population with a double rate of mental health problems as compared to hearing children. So if we just summarize shortly what we know about mental health problems in deaf populations, we can say, roughly, we have double the rate of mental health problems in deaf populations compared to general population samples. This is a very rough estimate, and I now put together many studies which I can't list up for this short address. So shortly, this rucksack is at least 2 times as heavy as the rucksack of the general population. And now we have to think, why is that so? I will give you some research data, what was found which correlates to mental health problems. I have already shown one major point. Problems to be understood. And as I speak to you, I don't see your faces, but I know deaf people all over the world. And I know even my deaf father, and I know the feelings he transported, how distressing it was not to be understood by others. And this feeling of not being understood causes a strange sensation of helplessness, of not feeling well, and of not feeling able to contribute. And we will speak about that a little bit later on when we explain the pathomechanisms of stress and how we can deal with that. But this problem of not being understood is very, 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 very prominent. But not being understood has many, many other factors. Not only the situation at the moment where a person can't hear you, or you can't hear the person. It has much deeper problems in the history. Many people who are deaf had experienced, and I will just give you a picture of that. You see different people here, and that child is deaf. What do the people do? They speak to each other, but that child doesn't hear what they are speaking. So that child has a great difficulty to learn about the world. Perhaps the parents may say, "Come here, sit," or "Here you eat," or "Here's a place to sleep." But that is not language. That is just commands. The child has to look, doesn't understand the world, and has no fund of information. We call this problem language deprivation syndrome, which means in the important time where each child learns language, that little child has no access to full language, because the hearing people speak and the child doesn't hear. So the child's brain is suffering. Suffering because a brain needs language to grow and to learn to think. You think that is, people think that is not so difficult. The child has enough to eat, has dresses. Why is that a big problem? No, it is a big problem. I will paint a picture how big that problem really is. What is wrong with that child? You will see immediately. That child is very thin. The belly is big. That child is starving, has not enough to eat. That child doesn't grow well. There's hunger. And this we can see very easily. But what we cannot see, if a little brain does not get enough language. But the brain is suffering like that. The brain wants to have language, but the child has to grow up without. And so the whole way of reacting to the environment is a little bit different, because you can't understand what's going on. Mechanisms, which we call stress mechanisms, are much more relevant and much more easy to be triggered. I will explain that later on, because I have to speak about another problem which is also correlated with mental health problems. I have to speak about that very frankly, because it is a huge problem in children and adults who are deaf. What do you see here? Here you see a violent behavior of an adult. A child who doesn't hear is sometimes not obedient. So the parents sometimes get angry and they slap the child, which is also a trauma. But also in the field of sexuality, we know about many problems, because children are abused. especially children who have handicaps are severely abused by adults, by peers, also in schools for deaf children. And this abuse has bad consequences. The child can't help himself, but the trauma of abuse is in his or her body. And this is always associated with later on mental health and health problems. So we've given some reasons. Interestingly, the degree of hearing loss is not correlated with mental health problems per se. So we have to concentrate on the main areas which contribute to mental health problems. One main area is problems in communication. From early childhood on and in the recent situation in everyday life. We have to think about traumas children have experienced, and we have to think about the problems people have to adapt to the challenges of life, because the fund of knowledge is limited. So, what is the underlying mechanism of all these phenomena? I will explain that briefly. In our body we have a very important system which helps us to adapt to our environment. This is the whole system of stress regulation. We all have stress. We have little stresses, big stresses. And stress is nothing bad at all. It is just normal. But what is happening in our body when things get challenging? For instance, a dangerous animal is coming up to us. Let us stay with that metaphor. What is happening in our body? I love lions, but let's say this lion is attacking us. What do we feel? We feel anxious, our blood pressure gets high, we want to flee, we get a lot of energy to run away. On the other hand side, if we are very brave and very skilled, we might fight that lion. We might get aggressive ourselves and beat him or try to kill him, whatever. So our body gets a lot of energy mobilized to flee or to attack. This is the reaction of fleeing from the lion. But we also get the energy to attack. And there's also one stress reaction which is mentioned not so frequently. We get the feeling we should play as if it would be death. Just lie down and be paralyzed. And wait until the lion has passed away. These are typical stress reactions which have many physical background how these things happen. And after a few minutes or an hour, we relax, the lion is gone, we feel well again and we calm down. But what happens if that stress is occurring every day, all the time? For instance, in our lives, if we always feel oppressed, others speak for us, we have no chance to say our opinion. We always get a little bit of this kind of activation. And this activation we can't show in movement, though this energy is stuck in the body. And this makes our body feel complaints like pain in the back or stomach or head, because we can't use that energy for fleeing or attacking. We just get stuck. And if this is happening all the time, our body gets more sick. And this kind of stress reactions we have to have in mind when we speak about mental health of deaf people. Because what we could not find, that mental health disorders like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder are more frequent in people who are deaf. We found that all conditions which are related to stress reactions which are causing really illnesses, these are the conditions which are much more frequent in people who are deaf compared to people who are hearing. But not the mental health disorders like schizophrenia or other severe mental health illnesses. So, I will summarize. We know what is mental health. We have spoken about it, have seen the face who is happy, who is reaching out, who is accepting his life. We have seen that growing up with deafness is a real challenge, and the special problems in communication from early on are interfering with our mental health. But also abuse is a very big problem. And now we have to think about what can we do to support positive mental health. You are deaf leaders. What can you do to support other people who are deaf to develop more mental health? That is a very important question. I will start with a very simple thing. One of the first things is to reach out to other human beings, to other people. Isolation is a very, very big problem for staying healthy, because humans are really beings who want to be together. So if you find a person who is deaf and isolated, try to connect that person with others. And if you are isolated yourself, try to find a person with whom or her you can connect. What do we need to connect with others? We need to communicate with them. I know in Europe there are also places where people who grew up deaf have no signs. But we saw, by teaching them a little bit of signing, and especially by really listening, what do they want to tell us? People start to open up and learn some signs. So I think this starting to connect to others is also linked with getting signs or expressions for what you feel and what you think. This is one thing. But another very important point is the following. If you look at a person and look like that, or that, or that doesn't help the person. So if we start to think about mental health, it is very important that we really look at the other person, even if that person is behaving badly. Look at that person with an open, loving face. Especially as you know, your signs are not sufficient, the person doesn't know to sign, but the person knows to read your face, whether if it is angry or open. So look at that person with a shining face, a loving face. The other person might be anxious or angry or nervous, regardless. But you look at that person with a loving face. And with an open body gesture. What do you want? Sometimes we are stressed ourselves because a person is behaving aggressively, as I've shown you. If we start to be aggressive against that person too, we don't help that person. Stay calm, stay open and wait. And then, when you see that person doing something good, appreciate that. Concentrate on what that person is succeeding in. And that is a lot. But we also have to think a little bit further. If you as deaf leaders are serving other deaf people, and you have to serve many who have had a bad background, provide opportunities where they can show what they can. We are serving deaf people with additional disabilities, and that is about 1/4 of all people who are deaf who have that condition. And we saw it is so important that meaningful work can be done. So you have to look where this person has a gift and where this person can perform something that person can be really proud of. It can be tiny or big. But look at that, what that person can contribute, and celebrate that. So it is very important to be creative to find places where productive work can be done. And now I come to a last very important point. what is happening here? These persons have a conflict. They're angry with each other. They blame each other. You are bad. You are silly. And that goes back and forth. That is not good for your mental health, because when you go to bed, you get a problem to fall asleep because you think about that silly person. And a conflict like that can destroy a whole community. So the most important thing is to stay in good mental health is to forgive each other, to try to make peace. That is not always easy, and you usually have to do a first step by looking what is my problem and start to apologize and to find a way to bridge the gap. Usually we think always of our position is the right one, but that is not true. So I think it is so important that we all train to forgive each other. Oh yes, maybe he was so angry because he was so stressed. He had such a bad time and so was angry at me. But I did not react friendly, so I may go to that person and say, I apologize, I was not friendly to you because you were stressed. I didn't understand that. And if that person sees that you are coming in a little bit of humble way, that person gets encouraged to think about him or herself as well. And to find peace again is one of the most important things we can experience. Think about your own lives and remember situations when you reconciled with another person. And remember how happy you were and how happy the other person was. And so you always work on that. Now we have thought about different aspects of mental health and deafness, but we have spoken also about very general things about mental health problems, and how we can support mental health in our own lives and in the lives of others. Because you are deaf leaders, are people who take responsibility also for life of others. And I think this aspect of mental health we have to mention at the end of that short address. It is very important that we feel that our life has a meaning. Research shows that to have only party and have a good time does not at the end contribute to a satisfying life. You have one party, another party, you get drunk, you have fun, but fun is not enough to have a meaningful and good life. Our life is designed also to serve others, which gives you a feeling of deep meaning. And I think at that point, we also have to think about mental health in a very big context. Not only about well-being, about work, about saying, yes, I'm good, and about loving others. Also about the big questions of life and death. Where do we come from? Where do we go to? Why are we here? Do we have a purpose here? And that is very important to think as well. And this actually puts us in the position to ask, what is the meaning of our life? I can only now end with a personal statement, because you have to give your answer yourself. For me, it is very important that I orientate my life to Jesus. I observe what he has said, how he spoke about loving each other, how he spoke about forgiving each other, and how he invites me to come to him here and forever. So I am also doing Bible paintings. You can look it up in the internet on the VB. And there are also African countries who use that as well. So I just want to tell you, that is for me a very, very important source of staying mentally healthy. And I want to encourage you to carry on, to reach out to others, and to look at your own mental health. And I know many people with bad experiences can have good quality of life, can overcome hardships, and can contribute in a wonderful way to a positive development in other lives, in other people's life. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope we can have an exchange tomorrow. All the best.